It's Sunday, December 24th, and this is The National. Tonight, Christmas celebrations in Bethlehem. We take you to the town revered as the birthplace of Jesus. The Montreal Symphony Orchestra launches an investigation into allegations of sexual misconduct against a former conductor. We talked to a musician who performed during his tenure. But we begin in the Philippines, where twin disasters have taken an awful toll ahead of Christmas. In a country more than 80% Roman Catholic, Christmas in the Philippines is very much a national celebration. But now it is a season of grief and terrible loss. On the southern island of Mindanao, a fire tore through a shopping mall, killing at least 37 people, while a powerful storm left more than 200 missing or dead. The CBC's Neil Coxel has our lead story.
In Mindanao, the mud is now a grave. The youngest, smallest were swept up in the deadly current, the flash floods fueled by Typhoon Tembin. There were warnings of the dangers and calls for evacuations.
We all do our part to keep our families alive.
But not everyone would or perhaps could leave. People here are resourceful. Their survival depends on it. The Philippines is familiar with the brutality of storms. It is hit with at least 20 typhoons a year. Tembin has been particularly painful.
There were 103 sana na mga houses dito, bahay.
There used to be 103 houses here, this rescue worker says. All their homes and livelihoods gone. Rice fields and the villages that survived on them wiped out. The Red Cross says damage like this is slowing efforts to get help to those who need it. One mayor told local media he blames years of logging in the region for leaving his people vulnerable to these kinds of disasters. Catholics make up the majority of the population in the Philippines. Millions were preparing to celebrate Christmas. But the country is facing, it seems, calamity after calamity. As so many deal with Tembin's destruction, this was unfolding in Davao City. Like the floods, also in Mindanao. Oh my God. The fire started in a mall busy with Christmas shoppers, but a call center is reportedly where many were trapped. The flames and smoke killed dozens of people. How it started is not known. President Rodrigo Duterte, a man often described as ruthless in his war on drugs and drug addicts, wept at what was unfolding in his hometown. There will be prayers this Christmas in the Philippines. But here, celebrating is impossible to fathom. Neil Coxel, CBC News, London.
In fact, Davao City has canceled the traditional feasts for Christmas and New Year's. The mood is simply too bleak. And here's one example of why. One of the call center workers caught in the fire sent heartbreaking messages to his brother, according to local media. Janil Adlawan says his 22-year-old brother, Ian Kim, texted him yesterday morning to alert him that a fire had broken out. Janil immediately called him and then heard these final words: "Brother, thank you for everything. I could no longer endure the heat of the fire." One worker who escaped the blaze said the danger wasn't immediately clear. Some became trapped when they took the time to go to their lockers to collect their belongings. The call center is run by the U.S. company Survey Sampling International. It's a huge player in the global market research, reaching into more than 90 countries. It has operated in Canada since 2001. Now, as we mentioned, the population of the Philippines is overwhelmingly Roman Catholic. And today, the Pope urged pilgrims at the Vatican to remember the people of Mindanao. His call for prayers to comfort all those who are suffering from this calamity came just hours before his traditional celebration of Christmas Eve Mass in St. Peter's Basilica. Now, this is Donald Trump's first Christmas Eve as president, and while his controversial tax bill has finally passed, it's pretty clear he's not getting everything on his wish list. Jacqueline Hansen has the details.
Private and protected, Donald Trump is on his holiday escape, while the White House is busy denying fresh claims that the president made disparaging comments about immigrants. In a new report, the New York Times detailed a heated meeting in June where President Trump discussed the number of visas granted by the State Department, reportedly calling it a flood of people that made a mockery of his attempts to crack down on immigration. The report claims Trump said immigrants from Haiti all have AIDS, and allegedly said that those who came from Nigeria would never go back to their huts. White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders says the Times is publishing lies from anonymous sources. And she's not the only one on the Trump team playing defense.
I was not in that meeting, but the people in the meeting say that those comments never happened. And so I have no belief that that actually transpired. Trump
has been bold in his language around immigration before, both legal and otherwise. As president,
if we don't get the wall, you're going to have a lot of very unhappy people, starting with me. We're going to get the wall.
And on the campaign trail.
They're bringing drugs. They're bringing crime. They're rapists.
Yet he's struggled to make progress on reforms. Just yesterday, Trump's latest restrictions on refugee admissions were partially blocked by a Seattle judge. Today, Trump tried to direct attention elsewhere. On Twitter, he called out FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe, questioning his impartiality.
They're very hot. You know, they're selling very well, but I think Santa's going to get that for you. I predict that Santa's going to get that for you.
But at his final appearance before Christmas, the only questions Trump faced were from children, wanting to know where Santa is. A White House tradition that's keeping him tucked away in his holiday bubble. Jacqueline Hansen, CBC News, Washington.
President Trump has praised new sanctions imposed Friday against North Korea by the United Nations. And today, the North Korean regime had its own reaction, calling the sanctions an act of war. So that is North Korea's official state broadcaster saying the UN resolution was rigged by the U.S. The Security Council wants to limit the country's access to petroleum products and reduce the amount of money North Koreans working abroad can send back home. These sanctions are in response to the North's recent missile tests. The world-famous conductor, Charles Dutoit, now faces one more allegation of sexual misconduct. Unlike the others, this one originated in Canada. Jayla Bernstein has that development. And finally, we hear from Dutoit himself.
Charles Dutoit has graced stages around the world, but now symphonies are rushing to cut ties or drop his performances. It's all in the wake of allegations of sexual assault. Dutoit was also the music director of the Montreal Symphony for 25 years, but when allegations first surfaced, management at the Orchestre Symphonique de Montréal said it had not received any formal reports of that nature. That has now changed. On Friday, the OSM received a complaint of sexual harassment, and it's now launching an investigation. The Montreal Symphony says it's determined to maintain and intensify its unconditional commitment to respect the dignity and fundamental rights of musicians and employees. It says it has a zero-tolerance policy. Marc Béliveau, a first violin with the Montreal Symphony, worked there during Dutoit's tenure.
I have a hard time finding the words, but I wish I could have done more. I don't know who it is, at this point. We don't know who it is, but if there are others, I wish we can support them in any way we can.
Yesterday, Dutoit denied the initial accusations. In a statement, he said, whilst informal physical contact is commonplace in the arts world as a mutual gesture of friendship, the serious accusations made involving coercion and forced physical contact have absolutely no basis in truth. CBC News has not been able to independently verify any of the allegations reported by the Associated Press. Jayla Bernstein, CBC News, Montreal.
An update now on a story we told you about earlier this week. Delilah Saunders, the young Inuk activist whose struggle with liver failure sparked a national discussion about transplant policy, is heading home to Newfoundland tonight, discharged from a Toronto hospital, a development her family and friends are calling a Christmas miracle. I spoke with Delilah Saunders in her hospital room on Tuesday after she says doctors told her she was ineligible for a replacement liver because she'd not abstained from alcohol for 6 months.
What is your big dream?
My big dream is, I want to be well. I want to recover, and I'm so grateful for my family.
So Saunders will be home for the holidays. She says doctors seem to think she is doing well enough to continue recovering at home. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has delivered his Christmas message. In it, he says all Canadians have a role to play in helping to make the world a better place. Here's a portion of what he said.
Whether it's lending a hand to a neighbor or volunteering for a cause we believe in, let's give generously and live out the values that bring us together. Let's also reach out and listen to those next door, across the aisle, and at the dinner table. Building a better world starts with where we work and live, in our communities and at home. Merry Christmas.
Now, midnight mass has already happened in Bethlehem, which Christians believe to be the birthplace of their Savior, Jesus Christ.
Adiutorium nostrum in nomine Domini.
The Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem led the Christmas Mass at the Church of the Nativity. Celebrations have been muted this year after Donald Trump announced he will move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. As always, though, some tourists were determined to visit the Holy City no matter what. And the U.S. is now not alone in its determination to move its embassy to Jerusalem. Guatemala today said it will do that too. The Central American country was one of just a handful to side with the U.S. in the face of a UN resolution to push the United States to reverse its recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. And Guatemala also happens to be a major recipient of U.S. aid. The U.S. had suggested countries that did not side with it could lose their funding. Well, before there was Santa Claus carols and the marketing of Christmas, there was St. Nicholas, a priest whose generosity was legendary. And there doesn't seem to be much doubt about where he lived or what he did, but where he is buried is another story. Here is Neil Coxall again on the search to reveal the secrets of the famous St. Nicholas Church.
Before the Santa Claus that so many of us know now, that jolly man stuffed into a red velvet suit, there was St. Nicholas. And this was his home. This was his church. But is it where he's buried? And why does it matter? The spirit of Christmas comes with a dose of the macabre here. This is southern Turkey. It's 20 degrees in December, not a snowflake in sight. The famous St. Nicholas Church is almost entirely swallowed up by the greenhouses of this agricultural town. Nicholas was a priest in the 4th century, canonized for his generosity. The frescoes are faded, but they still give a good idea of what St. Nicholas was known for, helping children and sailors. It's that history that draws visitors from around the world.
It's quite remarkable to take the very commercialized image and take it back to like a real saint that actually lived, 1600 years ago. And
centuries after his death in the Middle Ages, this church was as important a stop for pilgrims as Jerusalem. Even today, coming here is still a deeply spiritual experience. Dmitry Pozigun is visiting from Ukraine. It's his 4th time here.
For all Christians, and for us as Orthodox Christians, one of the most sacred place in the world.
But the place where they're praying, what's underneath, could make it even more significant. The Turkish team that's researching the history of this church, and has been doing so for decades, says they found a structure underneath that place of prayer. And what's underneath could finally prove where St. Nicholas is buried.
It is important, the head of the Turkish team says, for religious history. Many believe St. Nicholas was buried in one of the caskets already on display. Italians insist the saint's remains were stolen long ago, whisked out of Turkey, and taken to Bari. Beyond the religious significance, there are also tourism dollars at stake. In Demre, where the saint preached and prayed, the faithful, like Anatoly Reder, says it's what Nicholas did, not where he's buried, that matters.
It doesn't matter where the remains are.
But the legend of the saint's stolen remains still pains them, the idea of a soul ill at ease. So they'll be going to Bari next, their way of uniting their patron saint's body and soul. Nid Köksal, CBC News, Demre, Turkey.
After more than 4 decades preaching from the same church pulpit, a well-known Canadian pastor delivers his last Christmas sermon tonight. But Reverend Hawkes is not your average reverend. Lisa Jing has the story.
Roy Thompson Hall, where we have our Christmas Eve services.
For Reverend Brent Hawkes, preparing for his final Christmas sermon comes with mixed emotions.
I think the church needs new energy, needs someone with new skills that I've taken the church as far as I can.
This year, his message reflects those feelings.
Tonight, the theme is gifts and how I've been really blessed for the last 40 years to pastor this church.
Over his career, there has been a monumental shift in the LGBTQ community in Canada, and Hawkes has been at the forefront of change.
Brent Hawkes, a homosexual minister, goes on a month-long fast to
protesting Toronto's controversial bathhouse raids in the early 1980s.
Duly married in the eyes of God and in accordance with the laws of our land.
And in 2001, Hawkes officiated the first same-sex weddings in Canada. Using a legal loophole, he pushed the province of Ontario to recognize same-sex unions. It paved the way for same-sex marriage to be legalized across the country.
The reality is that most of the opposition to gay rights around the world is religious-based. And, I've always felt that a religious attack requires a religious response.
Jack said
Hawkes is also known for officiating at the 2011 funeral of former NDP leader Jack Layton, a ceremony he remembers with great sadness and pride. More recently, Hawkes' personal life has made headlines. He faced sexual assault allegations dating back to the 1970s. A Nova Scotia judge found him not guilty in January.
I hope that I would be judged by the work that I've done.
Even though he's retiring, Hawkes is continuing his activism in the LGBTQ community.
The unemployment rate is very high for transgender people, can't get jobs, and the poverty rate is very high. Seniors are worried about having to go into a senior's home and all of a sudden having to go back into the closet again.
The pastor, who started his career in Toronto, will be starting an organization tackling religious-based homophobia. He says it's especially important in today's political climate the community stays vigilant in keeping its hard-won rights. Lisa Shing, CBC News, Toronto.
Still ahead on the National. Since leaving office, U.S. President Jimmy Carter has been devoted to humanitarian work around the world. He's still at it and still teaching Sunday school, a president's lesson. And we all know that iconic Charlie Brown Christmas tune, but maybe not the tale behind it. Tonight, we'll fix that.
He was just so among us, and I turned around and there he was. And my heart was just going like this, but it just felt so comfortable.
At a time of year when words like peace and goodwill are so often heard, we once again turn to a story about a man who has brought those things to public life. Since leaving office, U.S. President Jimmy Carter has been devoted to humanitarian work. And despite a diagnosis of cancer in 2015, he is determined to continue. That brings the crowds to his church in Plains, Georgia, so they can all listen to the man they call Mr. Jimmy.
Good morning. You got 2? 3. Where's the service? Where y'all from?
Alabama.
23 and 24.
They have to really want to be here to be here.
28, 29. Good morning.
Morning. A drizzly hour shy of dawn.
Where y'all from?
We're from Newnan, Georgia. 24 hours from the main event. Many here quite literally drove through the night to be the first in line for tickets. Did I hear you say that you slept in the gas station?
Yes, right down 100 yards that way.
So where are you actually from?
Nashville, Tennessee.
From there to here, the tiny church parking lot in Plains, Georgia, often filled with hundreds of new people, all here to see a man they so worry about.
How's he doing?
He came in our business yesterday.
Oh, wonderful.
Good time, yeah.
We just love him to death.
He's a good man.
He is a good man.
He is Mr. Jimmy. Yeah. That's what they call him, eh? Mr. Jimmy.
That's what I called him.
Not Mr. President.
No, Mr. Jimmy. I've been knowing him since I was about 10.
Mr. Jimmy, as in President Jimmy Carter.
Good.
And this, you'll see once the sun comes up, is his church. Maranatha Baptist Church, regular congregation about 35. except on those swollen days when Carter teaches Sunday school, which she's done for years. But Sunday is a full day away. Now with tickets safe in hand, time for the extra souls in Plains to have a good look around.
All right.
And so this is the place of pilgrimage. And just to give you a sense of it, Plains is a place of 7 churches for 600 people. It's a place the locals describe as just so flat, water doesn't know which way to run. And it's a place of 2 forever linked industries, peanuts and Jimmy Carter. Tourists have come for both for years to hear the story of the farm boy from just down the road who sold boiled peanuts on these streets and may have grown to be governor and then president, but always called Plains home, still lives here.
You can get fried peanuts, boiled peanuts, parched peanuts, any kind of peanuts you want. This is a trading post. You can get all kinds of campaign buttons and stickers. We have the Plains Historic Inn.
And this is Jill Stuckey, another Plains fixture, a friend of the Carters who works at the church. A few years ago, when Carter announced cancer had spread to his brain, an editorial cartoonist drew a couple hammering an old campaign sign into their lawn with the new slogan, Jimmy Carter for Cancer Survivor. There's an idea, thought Stuckey. She hurried to get hundreds of signs made. The people of Plains scrambled to get them on their lawns.
When he first came home from the cancer treatment, his first one, that we wanted him to show that everybody in Plains was supporting him and welcoming. And, you know, we're used to Carter signs in Plains, so it just seemed perfect to greet him with the Carter for Cancer Survivor signs.
Word is the Carters were thrilled and suspected immediately it was her handiwork. And he called you?
Yeah, he called me when he got into the house, and he, you know, mission accomplished. He said it put a big smile on his face, so.
Affection for Carter is real here, largely because he's so real.
The other day he was down at the hardware store picking up some screws. He was probably working on one of his woodworking projects or fixing things. He fixes things around the church. One day he was at my house for a meal, and I looked up and he walked out of the house carrying one of my chairs. And the next morning about 7:30, he was back at the house with the chair. He had fixed it. So he's handyman, neighbor, fellow churchgoer. He's just a citizen of Plains.
The well-dressed capacity crowd lined up in ticket order. All the better for the Secret Service to keep an eye on them.
We thank you for their willingness.
Once inside, a little window into Carter's contribution. He made the cross, made the collection plates too. A few pictures, a few directions.
You have one of these right now. You put it on vibrate. If you don't know how, I got teenagers here this morning.
And eventually, class just sort of starts.
Well, Jan's probably told you I want to know whom I'm teaching, so we'll start in the middle this morning. Just tell me what state you're from or what country. Kentucky. Kentucky and California.
South Carolina.
South Carolina?
Florida.
Ohio and Florida? Tennessee. Wisconsin. Illinois. Alabama and Georgia, okay. What do we know about Paul, first of all? Nobody knows anything about. What about Paul? He traveled a lot.
Then he walked and talked, largely about lessons of leadership and kindness.
Each of us has a responsibility to take our own talent and ability and our own life and to use it in order to exemplify the finest elements of morality and ethical standards.
It's not just casual tourists listening in, by the way. Among them, the Browns. You see, in the 70s, Robert J. Brown was Jimmy Carter's Undersecretary of Labor. He so admired Carter that for a birthday present, his kids brought him here. He secretly hoped for a moment alone. Probably everyone did.
Forgiveness compassion, the alleviation of suffering. And all of us are able to commit ourselves to that kind of life.
For 45 minutes, barely a stumble. Well, just one. He couldn't find a passage.
I think I got the wrong one. I'm sure Romans 6:23.
His wife, Rosalind Carter, chimed in from the pews.
Ma'am? Rosalind? Rosalind? Rosalind, let me teach the lesson. I know it's on the back. I was going to tell them that later on. That's Ephesians 2:8 and 9. And I'm not being short with my wife, but I was going to get to that point later on. I was going to point out to you. Excuse me, Rosalind.
And that's class.
Thank you very much for coming this morning. That's the end of
But not the
lesson.
end.
And now
The Carters
we'll
have
have a
committed to
break,
photos
and then
like they always
gonna
have.
Hi there. Get on up. All right, everybody, look this way.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here.
Hundreds of photos. Everyone gets one.
Okay, everybody, look this way.
There's Jill Stuckey again, in charge of snapping them. Smile, don't shake hands, and risk passing him germs.
All right, look this way.
Click, and then go.
Hello.
The Carters used to stand for this part. His doctors have begged him to sit. He was 91 at the time. She's not far behind. Finally, the Browns. This is Undersecretary Bob Brown's one chance to say hello to his old boss.
Better not watch the camera.
And yet, he doesn't say a word.
All right, looking good.
They smile, get their picture, and leave.
Good.
We had to follow outside to find out why. Did you hope to have a moment with him? Did he recognize you? Were you?
I don't know, and I didn't expect him to. I was really, when I first seen him come out, I almost started crying because it's been a long, long time since I've actually seen him, you know, and he probably looked at me and thought he didn't any idea what I looked like.
Tourists don't really stay long. And eventually the pulse of planes slows to its normal resting rate. Around this time, near 6 o'clock, there's often another service, for usually just a couple dozen of the regulars. Used to be President Carter and Mrs. Carter would walk to it faithfully. Used to be. No one really expects that now. He's tired. At the stroke of 6, no sign. They'll all have to get used to not seeing him. But then, a little quiet convoy. And there he is. Too weak to walk the whole way to church, but a man who clearly doesn't want to miss a moment. Commitment, just the Carter way. President Carter is still teaching Sunday school at Maranatha Baptist Church, and his cancer continues to be in remission. He has also been busy signing copies of his brand new book. The craftsmanship of Jimmy Carter is about one of his passions, woodworking. Still ahead on The National, A Charlie Brown Christmas is a holiday classic, of course. People love that jazzy soundtrack, but it took a Halifax drummer years to be proud of his work. Tom Murphy has that story. It was made on a shoestring, rushed to air, and the suits at a U.S. network, if you can believe it, didn't like it. None of that stopped A Charlie Brown Christmas from becoming an instant classic. But what set it apart from just about anything else on TV at the time was that music, a jazz score on a holiday special. Even more special, Tom Murphy caught up with the drummer who helped write that now iconic music.
Right. Well, I do a little transition into it, and then we play it.
Christmas time is coming. Skating? Yeah, perfect. And do those save some for when we're going to really need it.
It's a holiday tradition, for some as much a part of Christmas as candy canes and plum pudding. The kind of performance that really packs the house and brings back memories of a more gentle time.
What is this? How'd you guys get in here?
And to think all of this almost didn't happen. But before we get to that, listen closely. Recognize it? So many of us do. This is Jerry Grinelli in his element. At 76, a living jazz legend who's played with so many of the greats.
Hello again.
American-born, rock and roll Hall of Famer, Buddhist, whose work has come to represent the very spirit of Christmas. That's because Jerry is the last surviving member of the Vince Guaraldi Trio, who back in 1965 wrote the soundtrack for the animated classic, A Charlie Brown Christmas.
CBS wasn't even going to run it the next year.
It almost didn't happen at all, in fact.
Yeah, CBS said no. You know, they said, look, that's not animation. That's not, you know, we don't want a little kid telling us what Christmas is. And it's jazz music, and you don't have jazz. 64, you don't have jazz music on television. But the proof of it is nobody messes with Coca-Cola. Because Coca-Cola said, we paid for the time and it's going on. And CBS said, well, we'll put it on because nobody will ever see it again.
And they certainly were wrong about that.
They were really wrong about that.
But it took Jerry decades to even be recognized as the drummer for this iconic Christmas music, and longer still to get his first royalty check. And even today, this almost didn't happen. Just last week, Jerry was in hospital, gravely ill with pneumonia. He canceled his cross-Canada tour, but begged the doctor to let him out for this show.
Even if you're in the hospital, I'll let you go for a couple hours and come back. You gotta love a guy like that, right? I'm on the mend. The Sunday's concert with Charlie Brown was really good medicine from being with all the people and playing music, you know.
Why was it good medicine?
It was important as medicine to go out on that stage and to play this. I'm 76, I'll be 77 in a couple of weeks. Wow, I'm old. But, you know, that's what I've been trained to do my whole life. I could be near death, and I have. This concert was about as near death as I have been.
Tell me about this. How does a Buddhist avant-garde drummer connect to the Charles Schulz version of Christmas?
Well, you know, Buddhism has the same principles as Christianity, except that it's not theistic. But Linus's speech is really important, you know.
Isn't there anyone who can tell me what Christmas is all about? Charlie Brown, I can tell you what Christmas is all about. Lights, please.
His speech, or now it's whichever gender wants to do it, but it's very important.
Peace and goodwill toward men. That's what Christmas is all about, Charlie Brown.
You know, this is what it's about. It's about family, it's about love, it's about caring for each other.
Is that what the Charlie Brown Christmas does?
I think it does. I mean, I just would say unequivocally it does, because otherwise, why the hell would it be this big 50 years, 50-something, almost 60 years later? You know, I mean, it's sold out every time.
But this concert has taken a toll on Jerry. There is no encore today.
So from the bottom of my heart, thank you all for sharing this.
Hi. Still, he musters the energy for this, his fans.
Thank you so much. This was a wonderful
wonderful show.
It was fun.
They line up for him, clutching their albums, CDs, and books for an autograph or just a quick word with Jerry.
Justin, your biggest fan.
What is it about Jerry that people seem to love so much?
My first encounter with Jerry was at the Shambhala Center, where he did a creative movement workshop. And it's just, there's a certain magic and a certain joy that he sparks in people, a childlike ability. He brings something out of us that we didn't know was there, or that we thought we lost.
For me, it just reminds me of Christmas when I was growing up, watching it on one of the 3 channels. So.
Those were the days.
Those are the days. Now we got too many channels, so that's about it.
That many people are still paying attention to this record, that it's every Christmas, families come and, you know, when I sign, you saw me at the concert signing records, and people are like, we're going to play Christmas Eve. This is what we do when we open our presents. Or we have, you know, this is how Christmas starts for us.
That's got to be special.
It is.
For you.
It is. It is very, it's really sweet.
And to think for decades, Jerry wouldn't even play this music. All the more special now for a man who found the joy in it once again. Tom Murphy, CBC News, Halifax.
Coming up, what has become a bit of a tradition here at the National. Red Sharon's story of the NORAD Santa tracker and how a typo is to thank for a now loved Christmas custom.
Santa's sleigh is moving north toward Canadian airspace.
We've never been sure how he does it, but what we do know is where he will be tonight at any given point. And for that, we can thank NORAD's Santa tracker. For more than 60 years, this military-inspired technology has just been part of Christmas, but it's a tradition that only came about by chance. Here's Red Sharon with a story that has become a tradition here at the National, tracking Santa.
It's here in the shadow of the Cheyenne Mountain, deep in the beauty of Colorado, that you'll find Peterson Air Force Base.
Gentlemen, how you doing there?
Home for over 50 years now to one of the most sophisticated defense systems in the world, scrambling fighters to protect the entire North American continent. And it was here, one December evening back in 1955, that the whole system was successfully infiltrated by a 5-year-old child. When this red phone rings, a 4-star general or the President of the United States is supposed to be calling.
He is all military, eh?
Oh, yes.
Terry Van Kuren's dad was base commander at the time.
Dad answers it with his very best military demeanor, you know, Colonel Jaup.
It wasn't the president or a 4-star general.
There's this long silence. And this little voice says, "Is this Santa Claus?"
The commander of the Combat Alert Center thinks someone is pulling his leg.
Dad thinks somebody's playing a trick on him, you know. "This is Colonel Jaup, the commander of the Combat Alert Center. Who's this?" And this little voice now is crying. Is this one of Santa's helpers then? So Dad finally figured out this really was a kid.
So that's the ad there. That started it all.
Hey kiddies, call me direct.
It turns out Sears had put an advertisement in the local paper. Hey kids, give Santa a call. But someone got one critical number wrong.
Roger, Aegis.
The military's defenses were overrun. Colonel Harry Shoup decided if you can't beat them, join them.
He called the radio station and said, "This is Colonel Shoup, the Combat Alert Center commander, and we have an unidentified flying object." "Why, it looks like a sleigh." Well, of course, craziness.
All those on the line, we can confirm that Santa is airborne at this time.
But that one wrong number has led to a little bit of military Christmas madness that has touched millions of children.
We had no idea that this would turn into
one of the largest outreach programs there is in all of government.
So this is it here?
And this is where the magic happens. This is where
Captain Jeff Davis, Director of Public Affairs for NORAD, says over 1,200 volunteers are now mobilized at this base every Christmas Eve.
He can track Santa all the way across the ocean.
Santa's sleigh is moving north toward Canadian airspace from
The website has well north of 20 million visitors.
Well, he'll be there around 11:30 tonight.
But it's the phone calls, the personal connection
Just put one in that corner and then the other one in that one.
okay, that keeps volunteers like Petty Officer First Class Scott Peddle and his wife Linda, both Canadians by the way,
Nice.
volunteering.
It's that feeling of such a special time of year. We've always made sure that it was a special time of year for us, where our family was always together, and you know, as we had kids and
It's for
you
the
bring them
kids.
up,
Yeah, it kicks
and
off the season.
it's all about that.
And just a short sled ride away, you'll find Langley, British Columbia, and the home of Owen Stevenson, 11. He likes to show his brother Finton around the site,
And so you track Santa on a test flight.
and he's been into it for some time. In fact,
Oh, okay, wait, they're coming.
here he is at the age of 4, calling in.
We got the milk and cookies for Santa now.
7 years later, Mom Shannon says he still gets as excited.
He really is into this. Wow.
Sort of.
How many times do you check it out?
It's hard to count.
You're a man of few words, aren't you?
Sometimes.
But make no mistake, he's watched every video. The NORAD Santa tracker is still very much part of his Christmas.
So that's Santa. He's a pretty nice guy, eh?
Yeah, he is. Those are for Santa.
Ooh,
Shouldn't eat them.
sorry.
How does reindeer fly? Well,
Back in Colorado, the volunteers are going flat out. By the end of the night, Santa trackers will talk to over 100,000 kids from all over the world.
And this one here looks like he spotted Santa.
And over the decades, Terry Van Kuren has tracked the success.
Oh, so and this is just filled, eh?
Yeah.
All
yeah.
the stories
and all
over the
different
years.
languages.
Save the articles. All started by that hard-nosed career military dad of hers.
But he must have been a softy underneath.
But he was a softie underneath. He just loved Christmas and he loved kids.
When you think of the millions of kids that he helped put a smile on their face on
I know
Christmas
it.
Eve.
It's just, yeah, makes me feel so happy.
The calls have been pouring in.
He'll be arriving there between 9 o'clock and midnight your time.
Sometimes, says Captain Jennifer Stadnick, yet another Canadian, they can be quite funny.
A lot of the times they tell the children that Santa won't come to their house until they're asleep, and then all of a sudden they'll hear the phone drop, and there'll be there'll be nobody on the line, and and then the mom or dad will pick up and say, he just ran up to his bed, and
It's been known to happen in the Stevenson household. Sooner to bed, sooner it's Christmas.
Good night, Owen. Good night. Oh, Mom.
Yeah?
Don't let Mr. Sheridan eat those cookies.
Okay.
I didn't. Red Sharon, CBC News, in Langley, British Columbia.
Now, NORAD takes the Santa business very seriously, and although much of the information is classified, it has shared some exclusive details about Santa's sleigh. It measures 75 cc's by 150 lps in length. That, of course, is candy canes by lollipops. And it's 55 cc's and 110 lps in height. It also carries weapons, but the antlers are purely defensive. That sleigh can obtain a maximum speed of faster than starlight. And as for emissions, sorry, NORAD says that is top secret. When we come back, as photos go, this one of the world is one of the world's most famous. It was taken 49 years ago tonight. So before we leave you to put out the milk and cookies, there's one more image to show you. It was 49 years ago tonight that American astronaut Bill Anders took one of the most famous photographs in history. Have a look and a listen.
In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And from the crew of Apollo 8, we close with good night, good luck, a Merry Christmas, and God bless all of you on the good earth.
And that is the National for this Christmas Eve. Thanks for watching. Good night.